Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's Vin PF, and on today's episode we've got something that pretty much passed me by, but we'll get into that until just a moment. I want to give you a little shout out to a guy called Alex who lent me this bottle. So you might have seen me talk about this when I did my whiskey in, whiskey out, and I'll mention it again probably when I kill this bottle. But there's a guy at my local whiskey club called Alex, and he has kind of taken to himself to lend me a few bottles when he gets down to this sort of heel kill marker. And for me that's great, that is, because this obviously didn't come from industry. I just lent from a friend, and I get to try whiskies that I probably wouldn't have tried nonetheless, and get to have a good wedge of them and finish them off. Perfect way of reviewing a whiskey, in my opinion. But in this particular instance, it's a really, really good thing, because this brand, Lochlea, would have passed me by entirely as it currently stands. Now, I'm not particularly good at keeping up with whiskey news. Stuff comes my way, if someone emails me about a brand or something like that, then I'll see it, but I don't spend my days scouring looking for new distilleries or looking for latest releases or anything like that. I just simply don't have the money to keep up with a lot of these releases, so stuff does miss me by sometimes. This was definitely one of those things. So here today, as you saw from the title, we have the Lochlea Fallow Edition, and this is the first crop. Now, what these guys are going to be doing, because I'm assuming that you might not have heard of them as well as I hadn't. These guys are pretty brand new to the circuit. They only built their distillery in 2018. Interestingly enough, they've got John Campbell from Lafroig. He was there at Lafroig for nearly 30 years and is now the guy who's looking after the whiskey down there. So that's a really good pedigree. If you don't know who that guy is, then Google him, but you'll recognise the face. If you've seen any kind of whiskey marketing around Islay or Lafroig or anything like that, you'd have seen his face before. He's been on everything. But in any case, he's looking after it, so again, excellent pedigree. But what we've got here is a kind of like an initial set of releases. I'm given to believe they're going to be doing it annually, but obviously who knows, that might stop at some point. But they initially released a kind of like an inaugural bottling. Then they went straight into this kind of like seasonal farming vibe. So they had like a sowing edition, then they had like a harvest edition. This is the fallow edition, and then they had a ploughing edition. That's already gone through one cycle, so this is all at the first crops. Now we're starting to see the sowing coming out again for the next one. So again, I don't know how they compare to each other between themselves, but I know that each of the releases has got a pretty serious difference in cask choices. Some are ex-bourbon, some are kind of like mixtures of casks. This one here is matured exclusively in first fill Oloroso sherry casks, which is pretty cool. I mean, that's why we're getting this kind of deep colour. This is non-chill filtered and natural colour as well, so that's pretty cool. We can talk a little bit about that as we get into it. But yeah, a really interesting thing, and we'll get into price a little bit later on, but they're keeping the bottles relatively good value. It's probably just shy of 50 quid for a brand new bottle, so for newer distilleries, 3-4 year old whiskey, that's pretty much the going rate. But there are some distilleries that are starting to really creep that up to nearly £100 for some of these kind of like more youthful whiskies. And that doesn't bother me. I'm not too bothered about age. If it's worth it, it's worth it. But when we start getting into that sort of triple figure range, that really does make me question my whiskey choices, because if I can get 2 bottles, I mean, let's say this is good. If I can get 2 bottles for the same price as 1 bottle, then bang for buck. That's what I'm looking for. Bang for buck. Okay, let's get into the actual tasting and see what we've got in the bottle. Now, as we said, natural coloured, non-chill filtered, so you can see that kind of deep dark. Like, I don't know, copper doesn't even do it justice. It's really got a really deep colour, but that's the kind of obviously sherry influence coming from that. And you guys know I don't typically lean towards the sherry, but let's see what we've got in this on the nose. Now, this is one of the things that I really struggle with is sherry. Is occasionally I'll pick up some sulphur on the nose. I'm not getting that on this, you'll be pleased to hear. But this is kind of deep and bold sherry, Dare I say sherry bomb? It's kind of in that vein. Really kind of treacly as well. It's got quite a lot of those tannic elements to it that mix quite well with sherry in the right elements. This isn't a kind of light dram. This is really like heavy hitting and deep. Let's get onto the palate. More of that coming through. You get a kind of initial, like really classic sherry, getting those kind of dried fruits, that fruit cake, Christmas cake, that kind of vibe. But for me, the interesting thing about this is you get a kind of real juicy burst from it as well, which is not something you always get from sherry. You do get some drying, it depends on what kind of sherry they use. Oloroso, typically, I would normally pick that out as a bit drier and a bit more tannic, but this is somehow picking up some really kind of like explosive, juicy notes from it as well, which is cool. I like that. That continues on into kind of more of those treacle vibes we're getting on the nose, with some kind of cinnamon spiciness happening as well. The finish isn't overly long. I would say medium, juicy to start with, dries out into kind of dry. It's drying, I guess, at the end, getting all those tannins on the tongue at the end. And it's not that spicy either, which is fine, So it starts out quite bold, and I don't want to say fizzles out, because that's not really fair to it. It doesn't overstay its welcome, put it that way, and it leaves you ready for the next dram, which I'm going to have right now. Now, for me, very pleasantly surprised with this. Obviously, when I see sherry on the label, it's going to give me a little bit of alarm bells, just because of my own predispositions, but I'm always happy to have that challenged, and in this case that's definitely that. This is a stunning whiskey, and I would have been happy if I'd have spent the 50 quid on this and not been given the last of the bottle. I'd have been super happy with that. And the cool thing about this whole process is that's now put this distillery on my radar, along with loads of others, of course, but I'll try my hardest to see if I can get hold of some more of this. I mean, it's not even selling out that quickly, which is awesome. And obviously that's the big worry about putting these sorts of things, these kind of hidden secrets out onto the internet, is that they'll now start to be kind of more popular. But yeah, these things, I mean, on check-in earlier today, Master of Malt are still stocking, not this one, but they're stocking the other versions, and even though they've got like the newer one still in stock for all about that kind of, they're keeping the price at about 50 quid sort of range, which is pretty good. I like that. Not bad for a 46% whiskey. But yeah, for me, super glad this is on my radar now. Super glad I get to try this. Super glad I get to try a sherry that I actually like, which is good. And that's happening more and more often, so maybe my palate's starting to change and I need to revisit a lot of these older whiskies that I didn't like when I started the channel. We'll see. But yeah, I'll say cheers to Alex for lending me this bottle, and cheers to you all as well. Hopefully you guys get to check out some Lochlea at some point in the future. Catch you again.